The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast fractured light across Victoria's face as her champagne glass hit the mahogany surface with deliberate force. The sound silenced the rehearsal dinner instantly. 40 guests, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, turned their heads in synchronized curiosity. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a 10-carat engagement ring that caught the light like a weapon, pointed toward the kitchen door. "I can smell it from here," Victoria announced, her voice slicing through the uncomfortable silence with surgical precision. "That disgusting smell of cheap spices and poverty cooking. It's making me nauseous, David. Absolutely nauseous." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several guests shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable, but silent. No one dared to speak. No one dared to challenge the bride-to-be, especially not 24 hours before what Manhattan society had dubbed the wedding of the decade. In the kitchen, separated by a single swinging door and 30 feet of marble flooring, Naomi Williams felt her hands freeze over the cast-iron pot. The 62-year-old woman had been preparing egusi soup, a traditional West African dish her grandmother had taught her decades ago in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn when Naomi was just 7 years old. The aroma of ground melon seeds, palm oil, and carefully selected spices filled the kitchen with warmth, with memory, with love. But to Victoria, it smelled like everything she wanted to erase from her carefully curated life. Naomi's dark hands, weathered by 6 decades of hard work and care, trembled slightly as she turned off the stove. She had been David Chen's nanny for 3 years, caring for his twin daughters after their mother passed away from cancer. She had wiped their tears, braided their hair, taught them about kindness in a world that valued cruelty disguised as ambition. She had never once been treated with such venom, not in this house, not by David, until Victoria entered his life 8 months ago. Through the small window in the kitchen door, Naomi could see Victoria standing now, her tall frame draped in a cream Valentino dress that probably cost more than Naomi earned in 6 months. Victoria's blonde hair fell in perfect waves down her back, her makeup applied with the precision of someone who had never known what it meant to cry real tears. She was beautiful in the way that magazines celebrated, cold and untouchable, a sculpture of perfection that had forgotten it was supposed to have a soul. "David, darling," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made several guests reach for their wine glasses in nervous anticipation. "I've been patient. I've been understanding. But I simply cannot live in a home that smells like a third-world marketplace. It's beneath us. It's beneath you." David Chen sat at the head of the table, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. At 41 years old, the tech billionaire had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single software program he coded in his mother's garage in San Francisco's Chinatown. His mother, Li Chen, had immigrated from Guangzhou with $17 in her pocket and a dream that her son would never know hunger the way she had. She had worked 3 jobs, her hands perpetually smelling of the restaurant kitchens where she washed dishes, the garlic and ginger and soy sauce that became the scent of David's childhood, the scent he associated with love, with sacrifice, with everything that mattered. His mother had died 5 years ago, her body worn out at 63 from decades of brutal labor. Before she passed, she had made David promise one thing: never forget where you came from, and never let anyone make you ashamed of it. But sitting there, watching his fiancée's lip curl in disgust, David felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been ignoring signs for months. The way Victoria refused to eat at ethnic restaurants. The way she made comments about those people when they passed immigrant neighborhoods. The way she had suggested more than once that perhaps the girls needed a nanny who was more, as she put it, sophisticated. He had told himself he was imagining things. He had told himself that Victoria was under stress from wedding planning. He had told himself lies because it was easier than facing the truth. "Victoria," David said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that only those who knew him well would recognize. "Naomi is preparing a meal that has cultural significance. She's not doing anything wrong." Victoria's laugh was sharp, brittle, designed to cut. "Cultural significance, David, please. We're not running a charity for people who can't adapt to American standards. If she wants to cook her little third-world recipes, she can do it in her own home, not in our kitchen. I want her gone." Tomorrow, before the wedding, the guests were now openly uncomfortable. A few women whispered behind their hands. 2 men near the window suddenly found their phones fascinating. David's best man, Marcus Rodriguez, A childhood friend who had grown up 3 blocks from David's mother's apartment met David's eyes across the table. Marcus's expression said everything. This is who she really is, and you know it. In the kitchen, Naomi carefully removed her apron, folding it with the same precise care she applied to everything in her life. Her eyes were dry, but her heart was breaking in a way that felt familiar, ancient, the accumulated weight of a lifetime of being made invisible, being made less than, being made to understand that her humanity was conditional on the comfort of those who deemed themselves superior. She thought of David's daughters, Emma and Lily, 9-year-old twins who had clung to her when their mother died, who called her Nana, who drew pictures of her with crayons and wrote "I love you" in crooked letters. She thought of how she had taught them to make her grandmother's peanut soup last winter when they were sad, how they had laughed as they stirred the pot, how food had become their language of healing. She thought of David's mother, Lee, whom she had met only once, 2 months before the older woman passed. Lee had come to the house, frail and tired, and had held Naomi's hands in the kitchen. "You smell like kindness," Lee had said in broken English, tears in her eyes. "You smell like home. Thank you for loving my grandbabies." Now, Naomi understood that Victoria wanted to erase that smell, that memory, that connection to everything David's mother had fought for. Naomi pushed open the kitchen door and walked into the dining room. Every eye turned to her. She was wearing a simple black dress and a white cardigan, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, her face lined with the kind of beauty that only comes from surviving hardship with grace. She walked with her back straight, her dignity intact, even as her world crumbled around her. "Mr. Chen," she said softly, looking directly at David and ignoring Victoria completely. "I apologize for any discomfort I've caused. I'll pack my things tonight and be gone by morning." The words hit David like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made several guests flinch. "Naomi, no," David said, his voice rough. "You're not going anywhere." Victoria's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing with anger and disbelief. "Excuse me?" David moved around the table, walking past his fiancée without looking at her, stopping directly in front of Naomi. Up close, he could see the tears she was holding back, the way her hands trembled slightly, the invisible wounds that his silence had allowed Victoria to inflict. And by the way, if you've ever found yourself in a situation similar to our characters, where dignity and respect are tested in the face of cruelty, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, as it helps us bring true and impactful stories to more people. Now back to the tension unfolding in that crystal-lit dining room. "Naomi," David said, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room understand that something fundamental was shifting. "What were you cooking?" Naomi blinked, confused by the question. "Egusi soup, Mr. Chen. It's a traditional recipe from my grandmother. Your daughters asked me to teach them, and I thought since we had the evening, I could prepare it for them to try tomorrow after school, before the wedding preparations became too hectic." "Your grandmother's recipe," David repeated, and suddenly he was 10 years old again, standing in his mother's kitchen, watching her stir a pot of noodles, the steam rising around her tired face like a blessing. "From where?" "Nigeria, sir. My grandmother immigrated in 1958. She worked as a maid in Manhattan for 43 years. She raised 6 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem. She taught me that food is how we remember who we are, how we honor those who came before us, how we teach the next generation that their roots matter." The silence in the room had changed quality. It was no longer uncomfortable. It was breathless, anticipatory, as if everyone sensed they were witnessing something irreversible. David turned slowly to face Victoria. She stood near her seat, her face a mask of barely controlled fury, her hand gripping her wineglass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "My mother," David said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "immigrated from China in 1979. She worked in restaurant kitchens for 26 years. She came home every night smelling like garlic, ginger, and cooking oil. That smell, Victoria, that smell you find so disgusting, is the smell of survival. It's the smell of sacrifice. It's the smell of love." Victoria's face paled slightly. "David, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," David interrupted, and there was no anger in his voice, just a terrible, crystalline clarity. "You meant exactly what you said, and I've been lying to myself for 8 months, pretending I didn't see it, pretending I didn't hear the little comments, the subtle digs, the way you flinch when we drive through certain neighborhoods. But I heard, I saw, I just didn't want to believe that I was about to marry someone who would look at a woman like Naomi, who has more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their entire body, and see her as beneath us. David, you're being dramatic, Victoria said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. She was calculating now, trying to determine how to regain control of the narrative. I'm simply saying that there's a time and place for everything. This is our rehearsal dinner, for God's sake. Can't we have one evening without the help parading their little cultural projects through our dining room? The help. The words landed like a grenade. Marcus stood up from his seat, his face flushed with barely contained rage. Two other guests, people David suddenly realized he barely knew, people Victoria had insisted they invite, exchanged satisfied glances as if this was the entertainment they had been hoping for all evening. David looked around the room and saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't his wedding. These weren't his people. This wasn't his life. This was Victoria's carefully constructed stage, and he was supposed to be her prop, her trophy, her validation that she had climbed far enough up the social ladder to escape whatever insecurity drove her cruelty. He thought of his daughters, asleep upstairs, oblivious to the ugliness unfolding below them. He thought of what kind of stepmother Victoria would be, what lessons she would teach them about who mattered and who didn't, about which smells were acceptable and which marked you as inferior. He thought of his mother, dying in a hospital bed, making him promise to never forget. And in that moment, David Chen made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was his grandmother's wedding ring, a simple band with a small jade stone, brought from China in 1952. He had planned to give it to Victoria during the ceremony, a symbolic gesture connecting his past to his future. He walked past Victoria, who was now looking at him with growing alarm, and stopped in front of Naomi. "Naomi," he said, and his voice was gentle now, stripped of everything except sincerity. "I need to ask your forgiveness, not just for tonight, but for every moment over the past 8 months when I allowed you to be treated as less than the extraordinary person you are. I've been a coward, and you've been a shield protecting my daughters from my terrible judgment." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Chen, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," David interrupted, "and I need to do something else." He turned back to Victoria, and every guest in the room leaned forward imperceptibly, sensing that they were about to witness something they would retell for years to come. "Victoria," David said, his voice carrying a finality that made her take an involuntary step backward. "The wedding is cancelled. I will cover all cancellation costs, compensate any vendors who suffer financial loss, and ensure that you are not held responsible for any expenses. But I cannot, in good conscience, marry someone who looks at human beings the way you looked at Naomi tonight. I can't bring that coldness into my daughters' lives. I can't betray my mother's memory that profoundly." The room erupted. Gasps, shocked exclamations, the scraping of chairs as people stood in disbelief. Victoria's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: shock, rage, humiliation, calculation, and finally, a mask of wounded dignity. "Are you going to humiliate me like this?" Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "In front of everyone over a goddamn nanny?" "No," David said quietly. "I'm going to honor the people who deserve honor. There's a difference." He opened the velvet box and held it out to Naomi. Her eyes widened in confusion and alarm. "This isn't a proposal," David said quickly, seeing her panic. "This is an apology. My grandmother brought this ring from China, with nothing else except hope. My mother wore it for 34 years. It represents everything I come from, everything I almost betrayed tonight. I want you to have it, not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness, but because I need you to know that I see you, Naomi. I see your worth, and I'm sorry I let anyone make you feel invisible." Naomi stared at the ring, then at David, then at the room full of people watching this impossible scene unfold. Her hand trembled as she reached out, not to take the ring but to gently close David's fingers around the box. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't need to give me jewelry to make this right. You made it right the moment you stood up. That's the apology, that's the honor." But David didn't lower his hand. "Then take it not as an apology, but as a promise. A promise that I will never again allow someone to make you or anyone else feel less than human in my presence. A promise that my daughters will grow up understanding that dignity isn't about money or status, but about how we treat people when no one is watching." Behind him, Victoria let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You're going to regret this, David. I will destroy you." I will sue you for humiliation, for emotional distress, for breach of promise. I will take everything you have." David finally turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that made Victoria's threats die in her throat. "You're welcome to try," David said calmly, "but you should know that as of 10 minutes ago, when you called Naomi the help with such venom, I instructed my attorney, who is sitting right over there, to draft paperwork for a complete cancellation of our wedding contract. Additionally, I've arranged for every penny that would have been spent on our wedding, approximately $2.3 million, to be donated to the Mercy House Women's Shelter, where Naomi has been volunteering every Saturday for the past 15 years. The color drained from Victoria's face completely. Several guests pulled out their phones, no doubt already composing texts to spread this news through Manhattan's social circles like wildfire. Marcus moved to stand beside David, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Two other guests, people David actually knew from his childhood, stood as well. The room was dividing, and Victoria found herself suddenly, terribly alone. "You'll never be accepted in society again," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its power. She sounded desperate now, flailing for any weapon that might wound. "Everyone will know you humiliated your fiancé the night before your wedding over a nanny." "Good," David said simply. "If that's the society you're describing, I don't want to be part of it." Victoria grabbed her purse, her hands shaking with rage and humiliation. She looked around the room, searching for allies, for someone to support her, to validate her worldview. She found none. Even the guests she had invited, people who had laughed at her cruel jokes in the past, were now looking away, unwilling to be associated with someone whose ugliness had been so publicly exposed. "This isn't over," Victoria hissed as she headed toward the door. "I will make you pay for this, David Chen. I will ruin you." She slammed the door behind her with such force that the crystal chandelier above the dining table shuddered, sending fractured light dancing across the faces of everyone left in the room. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of Naomi's quiet crying. She had collapsed into a nearby chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the release of emotions she had been holding back for hours, months, perhaps years. David knelt beside her chair, ignoring the stares of his guests, ignoring everything except this woman who had loved his daughters unconditionally, who had brought the memory of his mother into his home through food and stories and unwavering kindness. "Naomi," he said gently, "I'm so sorry." She looked up at him, her face wet with tears, and there was something in her eyes that David would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was recognition. The recognition of one human being seeing another human being clearly, without the distortion of wealth or status or social performance. "You're a good man, Mr. Chen," Naomi said. "Your mother would be proud." Those words broke something inside David that had been holding together through force of will. He felt tears burning in his own eyes, felt the weight of years of trying to belong to a world that required him to forget where he came from. "I need to ask you something," David said, and his voice was raw now, stripped of pretense. "Will you stay? Not just as a nanny, but as family. The girls love you. I love you, not romantically, but as someone who has become essential to who we are. Will you stay?" Naomi reached out and touched his face with her weathered hand, the same hand Victoria had wanted erased from this house, this life, this story. "Of course I'll stay," she said. "Where else would I go? Those girls are my heart." David stood, helping Naomi to her feet, and faced his remaining guests. Some looked supportive, others shocked, a few clearly eager to leave, and spread this scandalous tale through their social networks. "I think," David said, addressing the room, "that this rehearsal dinner is over. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry for the dramatic evening. I'll be in touch regarding the wedding cancellation. For those of you who traveled from out of town, all hotel accommodations will remain covered, and I'll arrange for travel reimbursement. I apologize for any inconvenience." People began to gather their things, the room filling with awkward murmurs and speculative whispers. Marcus approached, clapping David on the shoulder, with a force that conveyed everything words couldn't. "About damn time," Marcus said quietly. "I've been waiting 8 months for you to wake up." "I know," David replied. "I'm sorry it took me so long." As the guests filtered out, offering uncomfortable goodbyes and promises to call, David found himself standing alone in the dining room with Naomi and Marcus. The table was still set with its elaborate place settings, the flowers still perfect, the candles still burning. It looked like the aftermath of a battle fought with words instead of weapons. "Mr. Chen," Naomi said, having composed herself. "I should clean this up and finish preparing the soup. The girls will be hungry in the morning." "Naomi," David said, and there was a smile in his voice now, fragile but real. "Please, call me David. And yes, let's finish that soup. I'd like to help if you'll teach me." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Your mother taught you the basics already, whether you remember or not. Come on." The three of them moved into the kitchen, where the pot of egusi soup sat cooling on the stove. Naomi relit the burner and began explaining the process, the careful layering of flavors, the patience required to let ingredients reveal themselves slowly. David found himself relaxing for the first time in months, his hands busy with simple tasks under Naomi's gentle instruction. Marcus leaned against the counter, offering commentary and jokes that gradually eased the tension. Upstairs, David's daughters slept peacefully, unaware that their father had just chosen their future over his pride, their happiness over his reputation, their humanity over his comfort. In a luxury apartment across town, Victoria sat alone, her engagement ring glittering on her finger like an accusation. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends who had heard what happened, each message a subtle knife of judgment and schadenfreude. She had lost control of the narrative, lost the billionaire fiancé, lost her carefully constructed climb towards social validation. But worse than any of that, she had revealed her true self, and the revelation would follow her forever. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and saw herself clearly for the first time in years. Empty, cold, small. She had spent so much energy trying to distance herself from her own humble beginnings in rural Pennsylvania, trying to erase the memory of her mother cleaning houses to pay for her education, that she had erased her own humanity in the process. The irony was bitter and complete. She had become exactly what she feared being, worthless. Back in David's kitchen, as Naomi stirred the pot and explained how her grandmother had taught her to taste for balance, David felt something settle in his chest. It wasn't peace, exactly, not yet. The consequences of tonight would ripple forward for months, perhaps years. There would be legal battles, social awkwardness, questions from his daughters about why the wedding didn't happen. But underneath all of that was something solid and true. He had kept his mother's promise. He had not forgotten where he came from. He had not allowed someone he loved to be made invisible. "Taste this," Naomi said, holding out a spoon of the soup. David tasted it, and suddenly he was transported back to his mother's kitchen, to the smell of ginger and garlic, to the feeling of being completely loved and completely safe. "It's perfect," he said, and he meant more than just the soup. The morning after the cancelled wedding arrived with cruel brightness. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of David Chen's penthouse, illuminating the chaos of what should have been the happiest day of his life. Instead, boxes of wedding favors sat unopened in the foyer. A 3-tiered cake waited in a refrigerated truck somewhere in Manhattan, and 200 guests were waking up to confused text messages explaining that today's ceremony would not be taking place. David had been awake since 4 in the morning, sitting in his home office, watching his phone explode with notifications. News of the rehearsal dinner confrontation had spread through Manhattan's elite social circles with the speed and viciousness of a virus. By dawn, 3 gossip websites had published versions of the story, each more sensationalized than the last. "Tech billionaire dumps socialite fiancé for nanny," read one headline. "Wedding cancelled after racist tirade," proclaimed another. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any headline could capture. Marcus had stayed the night, sleeping on the couch in the media room, a gesture of solidarity that reminded David why they had remained friends for 33 years, despite their vastly different financial circumstances. Now Marcus appeared in the doorway of the office, holding 2 cups of coffee, his expression serious. "So you need to see this," Marcus said, handing David his phone. On the screen was Victoria's Instagram account. She had posted a lengthy statement at 6 in the morning, a carefully crafted piece of victim narrative that painted herself as a woman betrayed by a man who had chosen political correctness over genuine love. She claimed she had been misunderstood and that her comments about Naomi had been taken out of context by people eager to destroy a successful woman. The post had already garnered 15,000 likes and thousands of comments, split almost evenly between people defending her and people calling her out for her transparent manipulation. "She's good," Marcus said grimly. "I'll give her that. She knows how to spin a story." David set the phone down, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It doesn't matter. People who were there know the truth. People who weren't there will believe whatever confirms their existing worldview. Your PR team has been calling, Marcus continued. They want to issue a statement. They're worried about the impact on Chen Technologies' stock price. David laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Of course they are, because that's what matters, right? Not that I almost married someone who treats human beings like disposable objects, but that the stock price might dip 3%. Before Marcus could respond, they heard small footsteps in the hallway. Emma and Lily appeared in the doorway, still in their pajamas, their identical faces creased with confusion and concern. At 9 years old, the twins had their mother's delicate features and David's dark eyes, and right now, those eyes were filled with questions. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice small, "why is Nana crying in the kitchen?" David's heart clenched. He stood immediately, exchanging a quick glance with Marcus before kneeling to his daughter's eye level. "Nana's okay, sweetheart," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "She's just had a difficult night. We all have." "Is the wedding still happening?" Lily asked, and there was something in her voice that made David pause. It wasn't disappointment exactly, it was something closer to hope. David had been so consumed with his own drama that he hadn't stopped to consider how his daughters truly felt about Victoria. He had assumed they were excited about having a stepmother, about the wedding, about the blended family narrative he had been selling himself for months. "No, honey," David said gently. "The wedding isn't happening. Victoria and I decided that we're not right for each other." The relief that flooded both girls' faces was so obvious, so immediate, that David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind? "Can we go see Nana?" Emma asked, and without waiting for permission, both girls ran toward the kitchen. David followed, Marcus close behind, and found Naomi at the kitchen counter, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. The moment the girls saw her, they rushed to her side, wrapping their small arms around her waist with fierce protectiveness. "Don't cry, Nana," Lily said. "We won't let anyone be mean to you. We love you," Emma added. "You're not going anywhere, right? Daddy said you're staying?" Naomi looked at David over the girls' heads, her eyes red but clear. "I'm staying," she confirmed. "I'm not going anywhere." The girls cheered, a sound of pure joy that cut through the heaviness of the morning like light through darkness. David watched them, these two small humans who had somehow understood what he had taken months to see, and felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with shame. "Girls," David said, "I need to talk to Nana for a few minutes. Why don't you go with Uncle Marcus and he'll make you pancakes?" Marcus, bless him, immediately understood the assignment. "Come on, troublemakers. Let's see if we can make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs." As the girls followed Marcus, chattering excitedly about whether a T-Rex pancake was possible, David turned to Naomi. In the morning light, she looked exhausted, older than her 62 years, the weight of last night's humiliation still visible in the set of her shoulders. "Naomi," David began, but she held up a hand. "Before you say anything," Naomi said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking all night and I've made a decision." David's stomach dropped. "You're leaving?" "No," Naomi said, and a small smile touched her lips. "I'm staying, but on one condition. I want you to stop calling me your nanny." David blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Naomi said, her voice gaining strength, "that I love those girls like they're my own grandchildren. I've been here for 3 years, through their mother's death, through their grief, through their healing. I'm not an employee anymore, David, I'm family. And if I'm going to stay, I need you to see me that way. Not as someone you pay to care for your children, but as someone who chooses to be here because we belong to each other." The words hit David with unexpected force. She was right. Somewhere along the way, Naomi had stopped being hired help and had become essential, irreplaceable, woven into the fabric of their lives in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or paychecks. "You're right," David said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it clearly. Your family, Naomi. You have been for a long time." Naomi nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now there's something else, that ring you tried to give me last night. You don't have to take it," David interrupted. "I understand if it felt inappropriate or—" "I'm not taking it," Naomi said firmly, "but I have a different idea, a better idea." She moved to the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for David to join her. When he did, she folded her hands in front of her with the deliberate care of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. "For 15 years, Naomi began, "I've been volunteering at Mercy House Women's Shelter. I've seen hundreds of women come through those doors. Women fleeing abuse, women escaping poverty, women trying to rebuild their lives from nothing. And you know what almost all of them have in common? They're invisible. Society looks right through them, just like Victoria looked through me last night. David listened, sensing that Naomi was building towards something important. Many of these women, Naomi continued, are immigrants. They have skills, talents, recipes passed down through generations, stories worth telling, but they have no platform, no resources, no way to turn their knowledge into opportunity. I've been dreaming for years about creating something for them, but I never had the means. She looked at David directly, her gaze steady and clear. I want to open a restaurant, Naomi said, a place that celebrates immigrant cuisines, that employs women from the shelter, that teaches them business skills while honoring their cultural heritage. A place where the smells Victoria found so disgusting become the very thing that draws people in, that makes them curious, that breaks down walls. David felt something ignite in his chest, a spark of purpose that had been missing from his life for longer than he cared to admit. That's brilliant, he said. That's absolutely brilliant. I can't do it alone, Naomi said. I don't have business experience. I don't have capital. I don't have connections to investors or real estate or any of the things required to make this work. But you do. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Are you asking me to be your business partner? David asked, and he couldn't keep the excitement out of his voice. I'm asking you to put your money where your mouth was last night, Naomi said. You said you wanted to honor people who deserve honor. You said you wanted your daughters to understand that dignity isn't about wealth or status. Here's your chance to prove it, not with a grand gesture or a piece of jewelry, but with sustained commitment to building something that actually matters. David didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes, whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'm in. Naomi smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that transformed her entire face. Then we have work to do. But first, you need to handle the legal situation with Victoria, because I guarantee you she's not going to let this go quietly. As if summoned by the mention of her name, David's phone rang. His attorney, Richard Goldstein, calling at 7:30 on what should have been David's wedding day. Richard, David answered. I assume you've heard. Heard? Richard's voice was dry. David, it's all over the news. TMZ has a video. Someone at the dinner recorded the whole thing on their phone. David's blood ran cold. What? It's already been viewed 2 million times, Richard continued, and before you panic, you should know that it's actually working in your favor. Victoria comes across exactly as cruel as she actually is. Public opinion is overwhelmingly on your side. However, she's retained counsel, and they've sent a letter threatening to sue for breach of promise, emotional distress, and defamation. Defamation? David almost laughed. Everything I said was true. Truth is a defense, Richard agreed. But litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and messy. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid the publicity. They're asking for $5 million. David looked at Naomi, who was watching him with concern. He thought about Victoria's Instagram post, her carefully crafted victim narrative, her absolute refusal to take accountability for her own cruelty. Tell them no, David said firmly. Tell them I will not pay a single dollar to make this go away. If Victoria wants to sue me, she can sue me. I'll see her in court and I'll make sure every single person who was at that dinner testifies to exactly what she said and how she said it. Richard was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? This could get very ugly. I'm sure, David said. I'm done protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior. I'm done being afraid of what society thinks. If Victoria wants a war, she'll get one. After he hung up, Naomi reached across the table and squeezed his hand. That took courage, she said. No, David replied. Courage is what you showed last night, walking into that dining room with your head held high, even though you knew you were walking into hostility. Courage is what you've shown for 15 years, volunteering at that shelter, caring for women who society has discarded. All I did was finally stop being a coward. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, media attention, and social reckoning. The video from the rehearsal dinner went viral, sparking national conversations about racism, classism, and the treatment of domestic workers. Victoria's carefully constructed image crumbled under the weight of her own recorded words. Brands she had partnered with dropped her. Social invitations dried up. Her Instagram followers, once numbering in the hundreds of thousands, began abandoning her in droves. But Victoria wasn't going down without a fight. She appeared on a morning talk show, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, claiming she had been set up and that the video had been edited to make her look bad. She hired a crisis PR firm that began planting stories about David's controlling behavior and unstable mental state. The attacks were vicious, calculated, and ultimately ineffective. Too many people had been at that dinner. Too many witnesses were willing to speak on the record about what they had seen and heard. The truth, for once, was louder than the spin. Meanwhile, David and Naomi began the work of bringing their restaurant vision to life. They spent hours at Mercy House, talking to women about their culinary traditions, their dreams, their fears. They interviewed chefs, consulted with business advisors, scouted locations in Brooklyn neighborhoods that reminded David of his childhood. Emma and Lily were involved in every step, learning about business planning, cultural diversity, and the power of food to tell stories. They helped design the restaurant's logo, a simple illustration of hands holding a bowl, representing both giving and receiving, nourishment and community. 3 months after the cancelled wedding, they found the perfect space, a former textile factory in Brooklyn's Sunset Park neighborhood, an area rich with immigrant communities from China, Mexico, Central America, and the Middle East. The building needed extensive renovation, but it had good bones, high ceilings, and large windows that flooded the space with light. David bought the building outright and hired a construction team that included several graduates of a job training program for formerly incarcerated individuals. Naomi recruited a core team of 5 women from Mercy House, each bringing expertise in different cuisines: Mexican, Ethiopian, Vietnamese, Jamaican, and Nigerian. The restaurant would be called Roots, a name suggested by Emma during one of their planning meetings. "Because everyone has roots," the 9-year-old had explained, "and roots are what keep you strong even when the wind tries to blow you down." As construction progressed, Victoria's lawsuit moved forward as well. Her attorneys deposed David, Naomi, Marcus, and several guests from the rehearsal dinner. The depositions were brutal, with Victoria's lawyers trying to paint David as an impulsive man who had humiliated their client on a whim, and Naomi as a manipulative employee who had seduced her employer. The accusations were so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that they actually strengthened David's case. Even the judge presiding over the proceedings seemed skeptical of Victoria's claims. But then, 6 weeks before the case was scheduled to go to trial, something unexpected happened. Richard called David at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, his voice tight with barely suppressed excitement. "David, you need to sit down for this," Richard said. "I'm already sitting," David replied, his heart rate accelerating. "What happened?" "Victoria's been arrested," Richard said. "The FBI raided her apartment this afternoon. Turns out she's been running an investment fraud scheme for the past 3 years. She was taking money from wealthy women, promising to invest it in luxury real estate developments, and then using new investors' money to pay returns to old investors. Classic Ponzi scheme. She's looking at federal charges." David sat in stunned silence, processing this information. "How much money are we talking about?" "Preliminary estimates suggest around $12 million, Richard said. 47 victims so far, and more coming forward every hour. "David, this is massive. And here's the kicker. Several of the victims are women who were supposed to be at your wedding. Women Victoria invited. She was using your social status, your reputation, to legitimize herself and recruit new marks." The implications crashed over David like a wave. He had been a prop in Victoria's con, a respectable facade behind which she had been systematically defrauding vulnerable people. The wedding, the social climbing, the carefully curated image, all of it had been in service of her scheme. "The lawsuit?" David asked. "Withdrawn as of an hour ago," Richard said. "Her attorneys are scrambling to distance themselves from her." "David, you dodged a bullet. If you had married her, you could have been implicated. Your assets could have been seized. Your reputation could have been destroyed." After hanging up, David sat alone in his office for a long time, thinking about fate, about intuition, about the strange ways that life protects us from our own worst decisions. He thought about his mother, about her insistence that he never forget his roots, and wondered if somehow she had been watching over him, guiding him away from disaster. He found Naomi in the kitchen, as he so often did, preparing a late dinner for the girls. When he told her about Victoria's arrest, she simply nodded, unsurprised. "People who treat others as disposable," Naomi said quietly, "usually have something to hide. Cruelty is often a distraction from corruption." "How did you know?" David asked. "How did you see what I couldn't?" Naomi turned to face him, her expression gentle but firm. "Because I've spent my whole life being invisible to people like Victoria. And when you're invisible, you see things. You notice inconsistencies. You hear conversations people don't realize you're hearing. I didn't know specifically what she was hiding, but I knew she was hiding something. People who are genuinely secure in themselves don't need to tear others down to feel elevated. The wisdom in her words settled over David like a blessing. This woman, whom Victoria had wanted to erase from his life, had saved him from catastrophe simply by being exactly who she was: observant, patient, rooted in a moral clarity that came from surviving hardship without losing her humanity. "Thank you," David said, "for everything, for staying, for seeing what I couldn't see, for being family." Naomi smiled and returned to her cooking. "That's what family does," she said simply. 4 months later, on a crisp October evening, Roots Restaurant opened its doors for the first time. The space had been transformed into something magical. Exposed brick walls covered with photographs of the women who worked there, each image accompanied by a brief story of their journey. Long communal tables encouraged strangers to sit together, to share meals, to exchange stories. The open kitchen allowed diners to watch the cooks at work, to see the care and skill that went into every dish. The menu was a rotating celebration of immigrant cuisines, with each woman on the team featuring her specialties on different nights. Naomi's egusi soup, the dish that had sparked the confrontation that changed everything, was a permanent fixture, listed on the menu with a note, "In honor of grandmothers everywhere who taught us that food is love." The opening night was packed. Marcus was there, of course, along with David's daughters, who wore matching dresses and acted as unofficial greeters. Richard Goldstein came with his wife. Several of the guests from the infamous rehearsal dinner attended, perhaps seeking redemption for their silence that night. But the most important guests were the women from Mercy House, dozens of them, dressed in their best clothes, their faces glowing with pride as they watched their friends serve food, take orders, and receive genuine appreciation for their skills. David stood near the kitchen, watching Naomi move through the space with quiet authority, stopping to talk with diners, checking on her team, radiating a kind of joy that came from seeing a dream become reality. She had refused to take a salary, insisting instead on a 50-50 partnership, her sweat equity equal to his financial investment. Emma and Lily appeared at his side, each taking one of his hands. "Daddy," Emma said, looking up at him with serious eyes. "Is this what doing the right thing looks like?" David knelt down to his daughter's level, these two small humans who had taught him more about integrity than any business school ever could. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "This is exactly what it looks like. It looks like honoring people who deserve honor. It looks like building something that makes the world a little bit better. It looks like keeping promises, even when it's hard." "What promise?" Lily asked. "A promise I made to your grandmother," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I would never forget where I came from, that I would never let anyone make me ashamed of my roots, that I would use whatever I had to lift up people who society tries to make invisible." The girls nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. "We're proud of you, Daddy," Emma said. "And we love Nana," Lily added. "We're glad you didn't marry that mean lady." David laughed, pulling both girls into a tight hug. "Me too, baby, me too." As the evening progressed, David found himself thinking about Victoria, currently awaiting trial in a federal detention center, her carefully constructed life completely dismantled. He didn't feel satisfaction exactly, or vindication. What he felt was something closer to sadness for the waste of it all, for the energy she had poured into building a facade instead of building something real. He thought about the ring, his grandmother's jade ring still sitting in its velvet box in his desk drawer. Naomi had never taken it, had insisted it belonged with his family, should someday go to one of his daughters. But David had a different idea. He found Naomi taking a brief break in the small office they had set up in the back of the restaurant. She was reviewing the night's receipts, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every bit the successful businesswoman she had become. "Naomi," David said, "I have something for you." She looked up, immediately suspicious. "David Chen, if you're trying to give me that ring again." "Not the ring," David interrupted, pulling out a different box from his pocket. "Something better." He handed her a small leather folder. Inside was a deed, transferring 50% ownership of the restaurant building itself to Naomi Williams, along with a trust fund established in her name, ensuring her financial security for the rest of her life. Naomi stared at the documents, her hands beginning to shake. "David, I can't accept this. This is too much." "It's not enough," David said firmly. "You saved my daughters when they were drowning in grief. You saved me from making the worst mistake of my life. You taught me what real dignity looks like. This isn't charity, Naomi. This is partnership. This is family. This is what you've earned." Tears streamed down Naomi's face as she looked at the deed, at the trust documents, at the tangible proof that her life had value, that her contributions mattered, that she was seen. "Your mother would be proud of you," Naomi said finally, echoing the words she had spoken the night everything changed. "I hope so," David replied. "I'm trying to live up to her example. I'm trying to be the man she raised me to be." They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from vastly different backgrounds who had found common ground in shared values, in mutual respect, in the simple but revolutionary act of seeing each other's full humanity. Outside the office, the restaurant hummed with life, with laughter, with the mingled aromas of a dozen different cuisines, creating something entirely new. The women from Mercy House moved through the space with growing confidence, their skills finally recognized, their stories finally heard. This was what justice looked like, David realized. Not revenge, not punishment, but restoration. Not tearing down, but building up. Not making someone small, but making space for everyone to be fully human. Emma and Lily burst into the office, their faces flushed with excitement. "Nana! Daddy!" Emma shouted. "There's a reporter here from the New York Times. They want to write a story about the restaurant. And a lady from the Food Network," Lily added. "She says she wants to do a show about immigrant cooking." Naomi and David exchanged a glance, both recognizing that this was just the beginning, that the ripples from that terrible rehearsal dinner night were spreading outward in ways they couldn't have imagined. "Well," Naomi said, standing and straightening her apron, "I suppose we should go talk to them. But first," she pulled both girls into a hug, then extended her arm to David, pulling him in as well. The four of them stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a family forged not by blood or law, but by choice, by crisis, by the decision to honor each other's dignity even when the world said it didn't matter. "Thank you," Naomi whispered, "for seeing me, for standing up, for keeping your mother's promise." "Thank you," David replied, "for being exactly who you are, for never compromising, for teaching my daughters what real strength looks like." They pulled apart, wiped their eyes, and walked back out into the restaurant together, ready to tell their story, ready to face whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that mattered, something that would outlast them, something rooted in the simple but revolutionary principle that every human being deserves to be seen, to be honored, to be loved. In a federal detention center across town, Victoria sat alone in a small cell, her designer clothes replaced with a prison jumpsuit, her carefully constructed image completely shattered. She had lost everything: her freedom, her reputation, her carefully curated social status. But more than any of that, she had lost something she never knew she had until it was gone. The opportunity to be part of something real, something meaningful, something that transcended her own desperate need for validation. She thought about that night, about the smell of spices that had triggered such venom in her, and realized with crushing clarity that she had been fighting the wrong battle all along. She hadn't been fighting Naomi or David or even her own humble origins. She had been fighting herself, trying to erase the parts of her own story that she found shameful, trying to become someone she thought society would value, and in doing so, she had become worthless. The irony was complete and devastating. Back at Root's restaurant, as the evening wound down and the last satisfied customers filed out into the Brooklyn night, David stood with Naomi on the sidewalk, looking up at the sign above the door, the simple word glowing in warm light. "Roots." "We did it," Naomi said softly. "You did it," David corrected. "I just provided resources. You provided the vision, the heart, the soul. We did it together," Naomi insisted. "That's the whole point. None of us can do it alone. We need each other. Rich, poor, black, white, immigrant, native-born. We need each other. That's what this place represents." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. He thought about his mother, about her calloused hands and her unwavering belief that her son could be anything, do anything, as long as he never forgot where he came from. He thought about his daughters, asleep now in the car with Marcus watching over them, learning lessons about justice and dignity that no school could teach. He thought about Victoria and felt something unexpected: forgiveness, not for her sake, but for his own. Carrying anger was exhausting, and he had more important things to do with his energy. "Come on," Naomi said, linking her arm through his. "Let's go home. Those girls will want pancakes in the morning, and I promise to teach them your mother's recipe for congee." They walked toward the car together, two people who had found family in the most unexpected way, who had learned that honor isn't about wealth or status or social performance, but about the daily choice to see each other clearly, to stand up when it matters, to build something that makes the world a little bit better. Behind them, the lights of Roots restaurant glowed in the darkness, a beacon of hope, a testament to resilience, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of revolution is simply refusing to let anyone make you invisible. And somewhere in the city, in shelters and apartments and cramped rooms, women who had been told they didn't matter, women who had been made to feel invisible, women who carried the weight of their ancestors' recipes and stories and dreams. These women saw the news coverage of Roots restaurant and felt something shift inside them. Hope, the understanding that their stories mattered, that their skills had value, that they too could be seen. That was the real legacy of that terrible rehearsal dinner night, not the cancelled wedding or the viral video or the federal fraud case. The real legacy was the message that spread like wildfire through communities that had been systematically ignored. You matter, your roots matter, your story matters, and there are people who will fight to make sure you're seen. David Chen had learned what his mother had always known, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios or social status. True wealth is measured in the lives you touch, the dignity you uphold, the justice you create, the family you choose. And by that measure, he was the richest man in the world. End.